floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and welcome also from my side. I would like to start with two comments. The first is I do insist that properly pronounced in German, my name is Greif and not Krief. And also, of course, also this work of the problem-solving expert group was a very collaborative international effort with people from psychology, from educational sciences, and also from adult education involved in that. And for us, the challenge was a little bit to actually come up with something that hadn't really been there. As Dave and Jean-François both said numerous times, they have relied on numerous cycles, they have kind of revived, revisited, and then integrated new developments, such as, for instance, the components in numeracy. And we more or less started from scratch, which you can also see there was some problem solving in PIAAC Cycle 1, but it was entirely different. It was also named entirely different. So what I'll try to do, until I see this red card from Anouk, is to just give you a very broad overview of what the idea of problem solving was and also what we maybe learned from the results from the second cycle. And maybe it's fair to say, you heard that, and I don't think it's anything personal, but Jean-François and Dave are repeatedly referring back to each other, and not as much, I have to admit, to problem solving. So it seems like numeracy and literacy, they are really close siblings in many ways, and also in other assessments when you look at student-based assessments such as PISA, for instance. And other domains, sometimes called transversal domains, like problem solving, they are somehow the less liked cousin, I believe. So maybe we can kind of revisit a little bit whether that is actually reasonable or what actually the added value of problem solving, specifically adaptive problem solving in PIAAC actually is. So obviously problem solving is kind of a generic cognitive and metacognitive processing, so it's not really tied to specific contents like numeracy or literacy. And this is what you see when you look at the framework. You basically see that there are three different processes involved in all problem solving, which is very classical. I mean, this has been around for almost 100 years in the problem solving literature, which is basically you start by defining the problem. You then need to go ahead and search for additional information, usually, to see how you can get to the goal, and then apply this solution. And of course, the process character of this is increasingly underlined, and that it's not like step by step, but actually you do switch between the different processes. And you do that by employing cognitive processes, and much of the research, the early research, was actually mainly looking at cognitive processes, and there was a bit the focus in the idea of the PIAAC problem solving, also at metacognitive processes. So what we really wanted to implement in the items is, let's say in a way, the flexibility. We call it, it's called adaptive problem solving. So how adaptive are people actually when solving a problem? Are they kind of coming up with a plan once and then whatever happens around them, they are stuck? Or are they actually able to flexibly reevaluate new information that might be incoming and then change their plans and maybe adapt their behavior? So a bit in a way, it's a bit, you could almost say a trias. So of course problem solving, you can't do problem solving without a certain level of literacy or numeracy. So in a way, one could argue, and I'll also say something about this in a little bit, is that formal education, in particular in the early years, is very targeted at helping to establish foundations in literacy and numeracy. And this is really, in a way, what school needs to do. I mean, it's a entirely different discussion that doesn't happen enough, and that we have, for instance, in Germany, about, well, 20 to 25% of students that at the end of compulsory schooling don't have any basic math or reading skills. But essentially, after you have established that and when you enter the job, then you can hone on these foundational skills and develop additional skills, such as problem solving. And actually, we'll have a panel discussion later on. I think Jean-François and Dave are also joining, where we will discuss what actually PIAAC needs to measure to stay relevant. So it's a bit this idea of kind of building on literacy and numeracy, but then look at more complex cognitive and metacognitive processes. And I have also an example task to give you a bit of an idea. That's a very classical problem-solving task where you basically have to combine different conditions. It's, I guess I could say it's almost taken out of my life. You know, it's early in the morning. You need to bring the children to kindergarten, and you need to do a number of other things, and this in a traffic-heavy environment. Then you've come up with a plan, and then suddenly you listen to the news and there's some construction work or some rush hour, so you can't, basically you have to readjust your plan. So that's a very simple example of how we understood in the expert group the idea of situations change, and then actually how do you react to these changes. And Dave had this very nice example of looking at the process data. We haven't done that, but I also think it's not only whether people actually do that, but also how, which means how quickly, how many detours they take, and to which extent they correct the errors. So this is very broadly speaking the conceptual framework, just also presenting a little bit of the results that we saw in PIAAC cycle 2, and very simply this is just the distribution of the different proficiency levels. We have 4 levels and then below level 1. So for 2 reasons, there are no very foundational skills like the ones that Dave presented. First is obviously we started from scratch, so we didn't have such an elaborate assessment. And secondly, there really is the question, can you do this for something like problem solving? So you saw the extremely fundamental tasks that Dave presented. So do you even have problems that would be that simple? And in fact, already here, we had the discussion that tasks located on level 1, they are so simple, they are so easy that it really bears the question, is that really solving a problem, or is that maybe just following instructions? So when you look at the very easy items, you're kind of almost getting into something that could be called maybe literacy or something weird like that. So, but what you see here is that internationally, you do have almost 30% that are only able or not even able to solve very simple problems. And then when you look at the top performers, there are also very few. And just, you know, putting that apart, it really means below level 1, as I just mentioned, you know, then it would probably also be an easy literacy item. It's really like you read a text or you get some information and you do exactly what it says in there, but you don't actively solve a problem. You don't combine information. So, and we have almost 10%, that is a considerable number, that is below level 1, and we have few that are at level 4, and level 4 is kind of, you know, where you really need to combine different information, where you need to change plans, where you need to consider different restrictions, and all these type of things. Looking briefly at the international comparison, of course, you know, here you have these type of rankings, high-performing countries, Japan, and then not only Finland, but all the Scandinavian countries, and Chile and Poland, for instance, on the lower bottom, but of course, with a lot of variation within each country. And that is actually something that is quite interesting. It seems, you know, of course, it's all correlational, and of course, there is the hen and egg problem, but it seems like problem solving is a little less tied to parental background. It's a little less influenced by social status as compared to literacy and numeracy. Maybe that's why it is the unlike cousin, or maybe that is also why, because literacy and numeracy are mainly also shaped during formal education, and problem solving develops somewhat more, let's say, dynamically, and people have a chance later in life to some extent, decouple it from their social background. And that's actually something that we see in many areas, that When you look at the status during formal education or after formal education, the relations to background variables are somewhat stronger than when you look at it later on in life. What else do we see in the report? Some interesting stuff. I actually think, Anouk, for those of you being from Germany, I think the German report on problem solving will soon be published in a couple of months. So I think we put a lot of this information in this report. And what we see there is that obviously, and again, it's correlational, it's the hen and egg thing, but when you do encounter problem-solving situations at your workplace more often, you have higher problem-solving scores. When you have the chance, when you have more responsibility, when you have more flexibility in how to structure your work, in the tasks that you approach and how you approach them, you do have higher levels of problem solving. So that could be, of course, a self-selection effect, but there could also be some practice effect, and that's why I hope that maybe we can also look more at longitudinal data, not only at trends with literacy and numeracy, but for instance also with problem solving. So I think, in a way, first of all, I think I'm going to be the only one who sticks to the time right here, so we do have so we do have some time for questions afterward, but it kind of, so obviously I do believe that an assessment like PIAAC that looks at real-world skills should not stop short at, let's say, highly relevant but content-bound literacies and literacy and numeracy, but also look at more dynamic skills that are, I mean, of course we have items that are embedded in a math context, that are embedded in a literacy context, but there are also other contexts. And of course you need to be able to read, and you need to be able to do some, to work with numbers to solve these problems. But that's not really the core of the idea. So I think it relates a little bit to the overarching question, and that is not so much bound to problem solving, what an assessment like PIAAC needs to do to really stay relevant, and what skills come into play. And again, I mean, that is maybe something that we can discuss later, also with Claudia from OECD, on what is a good balance, what is striking a good balance between skills that are, without any doubt, highly relevant, and at the same time staying, well, up to date with what happens globally and in our society. Okay. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.